So today we're going to talk a little bit about drum set. So kind of what I wanted to talk about is just in general some things you can do with the drum set. I've decided to do a very minimal drum set setup because it kind of forces you to get creative with what little resources you have. So today I have one snare drum, a pair of hi-hats, and a bass drum. That's it. I don't have anything else. I got a pair of sticks and my imagination. So what I want to do is I want to go through a little bit and give you guys some tools as to how to make what few things there are as exciting as it can be. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a very basic rock groove. Some of us have played rock grooves before, some of us have never seen them before, but I'm going to play the most basic one we've got. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we get there, and hopefully we'll go from there. So, good old rock groove. So all it's comprised of is the hi-hat just goes forever. I'm going to use numbers. I'm going to use 1, 2, 3, and 4 for right now. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Bass drum gets to go on 1, 2, 3. Snare drum gets to go in on 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4. 1, 2, 4. Just with one drum beat, we have a few options to us, so we've got speed, we've got volume. Those are the two big things we've got right now for what we want to do with this drum beat. Now, it's going to get old quick because it's just one thing. We don't know how to do a whole lot yet, so let's add in a couple other ideas. So the first thing I'm going to add in is an idea known as the grid. So what the grid is I think of it like a piece of paper. There's a big old grid, you know, X and Y axis, all that good stuff. Most of it's the same, and then it's how everything, all that stuff. Now, for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to keep the hi-hat the same. We're going to keep the snare drum the same. All we're going to do is we're going to change the bass drum around. So how we're going to start with that is we're going to start with the bass drum on 1, so good old how it normally sounds. Now, let's put the bass drum on 2. That means beat 1 has nothing but the hi-hat on it. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's really awkward to get into it, but once you figure it out, you kind of get in this weird groove that just, it feels nice. I enjoy that drum beat. I use it a lot. So just with those two, now we have some more things to play with. All right, let's move on. Let's move to where the bass drum is on 3, which means that the bass drum gets to play with the snare drum. So it'll be kind of like this. Pretty fun, pretty interesting, not super exciting for a lot of it because now you have less things going on even though there are more physical things going on. And then the last one will be beat 4. Beat 4 is not the hardest in my opinion. For me, the hardest one is beat 2. Now, beat 4 has its own difficulties because it comes right after the snare drum and it doesn't line up where we want it to be. Now, the reason why we do something like the grid is because now we have access to a whole lot more options on the bass drum, and I'll show you in a second. But first, what I want to do is I want to play the full grid for you, kind of how it looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play where the bass drum's on beat 1 4 times, then I'm going to play where the bass drum's on beat 2 4 times, then 3, then 4. Sound good? Here we go. That's kind of what it sounds like. It's definitely an exercise. It sounds like an exercise. But the reason why we work on it is now we have the freedom to put the bass drum in many different places. And that's where we start getting what a lot of drummers play. So I'll show you a little bit. Here we go. A lot more variation, a lot more fun to be had in that regard. Now, it's still pretty limiting. One thing we can do is we can change the hi-hat rhythm so that it's twice as fast. Now, for right now, I'm going to use 2 hands to play it. It's going to be a little awkward at first, but it won't be too bad when you get the hang of it. It's just a coordination thing, just like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. It's just weird until we get it. All right, here we go. That's all it looks like. Now, going 1, 2, 3, 4, that kind of doesn't work because now we have 2 different ones. So what I like to do is I will go to like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now I have 8 notes worth of things to name them. And whenever I talk about them, it'll be like, oh, the and of 1, which is 1 and, or the and of 2. That sort of thing. It's pretty weird at first, but you'll get the hang of it after a while. It's just a good counting method to have for right now. So now we're thinking of it with 4 beats, but there's ands involved. Cool. So we can apply the grid in this fashion as well. One thing we can do is we will have the bass drum going on the 1, then we'll move it to the and, then we'll move it to the 2, and then the and, 3, and 4, and. That sort of thing. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to let me know. In the meantime, I'm just gonna keep on going. So, here we go. So that was it on beat 1. Now we're going to move it to the and of 1. Now this one's a little hard because now you play with the left hand instead of the right hand. We've been playing with the right hand in the bass drum this entire time. But when we move to the left hand, it kind of is hard. And part of it is because we split our body kind of down the middle. So right now, right hand, right foot, this is a team. When you start using the other side, then all of a sudden the team kind of gets a little weird, a little messed up. As a drummer, we kind of split ourselves in half. Sometimes we split ourselves in half this way, so our hands can do whatever, and then our feet have to follow everything. Our goal here, by the end of today at least, is to try and get some of that broken up, so that way we can start thinking each section as its own thing. My right hand can do whatever it wants, my left hand can do whatever it wants, my right foot, and even my left foot. So that's kind of the goal here. It's gonna be a little awkward, a little hard. It's definitely gonna take a lot of time. but it is so worth it because there's so many cool things you can play while doing it. So let's move over to beat 2. That'll be the third hi-hat note. That one's a little bit easier because it's, again, back to your right hand. So now we're going to do the and of 2, which in my opinion is probably one of the harder ones of this type. So here we go. Definitely a little awkward. Now, the second easiest one, the easiest one was where the bass drum was on 1, is bass drum on 3 with the snare drum. Again, it's so much easier to play with the snare drum because it's, everything comes together. It's a little bit boring to hear when it's by itself all the time, but it's well worth it. Rinse and repeat for the and of 3, beat 4, and the and of 4. There's a whole lot of stuff to be had there, but now you have a little bit more freedom with the bass drum. It's not just tied to your right hand now. It's still tied to the hi-hat where we play all the notes with the hi-hat, but now we can do it a little bit more where we can play with both our limbs and the bass drum without having to worry about being like, oh, we have to use the right hand. It gives us more freedom. So this is kind of what it sounds like when you kind of are able to do this sort of thing. Here we go. A lot more things to be had. It's definitely really fun, but we're still not there yet. It's still not sounding super amazing. There's still some kind of dependence that we have on our own instruments, on our own, like the hi-hat or the bass drum or whatever. So the next thing I do is I tend to make it so that all of these notes on the hi-hat go in one hand. It sounds kind of like this. It's the same process as we did with the 16th notes when we were doing this, except now we do it with one hand. The reason why this is really important is because it'll transition us to the hard part, which is going back to the normal grid that we used and changing it slightly. So I will go back to the normal grid and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm still thinking 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, because those ands are gonna start showing up. Like so. So I'll start on the 1, then I'll do the and of 1. Here we go. Already, this is difficult. When I first did that, my foot could not, for the life of me, play without the hi-hat playing. So sometimes I would be like, and sometimes I would be like I would just skip the whole thing entirely. It's very hard to do at the beginning, but once you start getting it figured out, take it as slow as you need to, all of a sudden things will open up and you can start playing things very differently, and it's much more fun that way. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what happens when we finally get some freedom there, and then we can start making our own decisions on the bass drum without worrying about whether the hi-hat's playing or not, or the snare drum's playing or not. I threw in what's called triplets, where I'm putting 3 notes for every hi-hat as a thought. So instead of it being like 1 and 2 and, I'm thinking like 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, that sort of thing. That's pretty advanced. It's a little bit more difficult, but it gives more variety again, and that's the whole goal here. All right, so we moved a bunch of stuff on the bass drum. We have done nothing to the snare drum, nothing to the hi-hat. Well, let's change a little bit here. So one thing that can add a little bit of spice to your playing is accents. So I'm gonna accent the hi-hat, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the side of the stick, let's see here, side of the stick on the side of the hi-hat. Makes it louder and makes it a little bit washier versus the tip of the stick, this guy right here, on the top. That sort of thing. Lots of cool stuff can be had there. One of my favorite things to do is go back to the 16th note thing with both hands on the hi-hat and go to town on that. It starts making it sound really funky. That sort of thing. Next thing we can do is finally lift our left foot. We have kept it down the whole time, made it so that this is nice and crispy, but we can actually lift it up. One of the easiest drum beats to learn at the beginning for this is what I call the disco beat. And what it is the bass drum plays at the very first note, and it plays with the snare drum, so it looks like this. But my feet are doing this kind of a motion the whole way through, for both feet. Kind of like that. Snare drum hasn't changed, hi-hat hasn't changed. Ta-da! Now, I've kind of avoided moving the snare drum a bunch, and part of it is because it's very awkward, and it goes against a lot of what rock music has these days. A lot of rock music, they like keeping that nice heavy snare drum on 2 and 4. Same thing with a lot of other genres. Funk likes it, hip-hop likes it. It's just something that we as humans like to hear. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna play a different drum pattern, changing the snare drum, and it makes everything completely different. So for reference, I'm gonna play a normal rock beat, and I'm gonna keep the feet the same, and I'm gonna keep the hi-hat the same. So it'll look like this. That's all I'm gonna play for the hi-hat and the bass drum. Snare drum's gonna change though. Here we go. All of a sudden it's completely different. It just feels way different. Here's another one. Still way different. As soon as we move the snare drum, it just completely changes everything. And it's because it's kind of like the anchor point for everything. So now if we're able to do the grid on the bass drum, why don't we do the grid on the snare drum? Why don't we do the grid on the hi-hat? Why don't we change that sort of stuff up? I think that would make things a whole lot cooler sounding. So I'm gonna play a basic rock groove. I'm gonna slowly morph, changing the bass drum out, and then I'm gonna start changing the snare drum out. And the beauty of it is you can change the bass drum and the snare drum at the same time. Now here's the thing, we still gotta be counting the whole way through, or else we're gonna start making some really weird rhythms, and we don't wanna get lost. So I'm in my brain thinking 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that's all that's going on. Here we go. Ta-da! Feels different. Now, I've been trying not to, but I did it a little bit just now. I tried not to move the hi-hat too much. When we move the hi-hat around, it, again, morphs into more cool stuff we can do, more variants, but you gotta be careful with it because now you have nothing that's holding the fort down, keeping everything steady. So you gotta be really good at counting. A great thing to help you is what's called a metronome. And basically what a metronome is it's this little box. It's also an app on a phone or a tablet or a program on the computer. And all it does is it'll go beep, basically however long you want for as many beats per minute as you want. So a good generic thing to think about is 60 beats per minute. Well, that's 1 beep per second. 120 beats per minute, that's 2 beeps every second. Now, one thing I like to do is I like to use songs to help me figure out my speed, how fast those beeps are going. One thing I like to use is good old Stars and Stripes. Bum bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum ba-da-da-dum bum 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 bum. That is 120. Nice and simple. Another tune that people like to use is for 100 beats per minute. It's used a lot in like CPR and stuff because you wanna do that procedure at a certain speed, and you don't want to go too fast and you don't want to go too slow. So what they use is they use songs. So one song they use is "Staying Alive." Ba ba da ba da ba da ba ba da ba da ba da ba ba da da ba ba da da. That tune, very fun, very catchy. Because of that, now we can like figure out how fast we go. So if we use a metronome while working on all this, we're not only figuring out the order in which things are going in, because that's one thing that's going to change a bunch, but also the speed, which is going to drastically affect how we play and what we're capable of playing. So like for instance, if I'm playing nice and slow, big, full, spacious things sound way cooler. Now, if I'm playing super fast and I do those big, spacious things, it's going to sound a little bit more awkward, I guess. So here we go. Play it faster, it doesn't feel as big and as spacious. It sounds way different. Way different. We can use that to our advantage. We can also use that to our disadvantage sometimes, because one thing drummers like to do is they like to hit all the things all the time. And sometimes that's not the answer. So the next thing we can use to give us more variance is we can use rudiments. Now I talked about this a few weeks ago, but I'm going to talk about it again. So rudiments are like the building blocks of most everything percussionists and drummers do. One thing we do is we'll use them like their words, that kind of deal. We memorize these certain things, there's 40 of them, and then we use them in our playing as things like, oh, I already know how to play this, so then I just do that. And then we can use them as building blocks for other things. So the one that I want to work on right now is good old paradiddle. Now, as I was talking about a few weeks ago, I'll go over it again. Drummers, we're not the smartest when it comes to naming things, so para is 2 notes, 2 hands. It'll look like this. Para. That's kind of what it sounds like. And then the next part of it is a diddle, which is 2 notes with 1 hand. Diddle. Paradiddle. Paradiddle. Not super crazy. Playing it nice and slow, yeah, it's not too bad. But as we speed it up, it starts getting harder and harder to keep track of. So that's why we got to work on it. When we start it very slow, it's like taking a word and just going w, o, duh. Kind of like when I was first learning how to read. That's kind of what it was. But as we get more and more used to it, we can just say word. So. We can play these things pretty fast. But the cool thing about it, going back to the whole accents thing and going back to the whole trying to figure out what we can do with what little we have, is paradiddles are super useful for this. And there's a grid for it, which I'll show you afterwards. It's a very hard grid, so don't expect to get it in any sort of quick time. It took me a long time to figure this one out, but it was very fun. Now it's part of my warm-up, trying to warm up my brain, warm up my hands, and warm up everything, really. So here we go. Paradiddles. Let's put the right hand on the hi-hat and the left hand on the snare drum. It's like they have a little conversation with each other. All right, now if we're thinking of the whole 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and thing, then on beat 3, we're gonna have to make the snare drum a little bit louder. We're gonna accent it. Another thing we can do is we can accent beat 1 on the hi-hat. That'll give us a little bit more clarity as to where we're at. And then lastly, we have a foot doing nothing, so let's add in bass drum on beat 1. Oh, why not? Let's add bass drum on beat 3 as well. At this kind of speed, it's like we're trying to figure it out. When we go a little faster, it's going to get weirder. It's going to be harder to pay attention to because now we have to think of the word as like word instead of each individual letter that's going on. See what I mean? But there's a grid to this. So I'm going to show you the grid, and basically what it is we're going to start with a little bit of a normal bass drum, normal snare drum, normal hi-hat, though the bass drum will be playing on 1 and on 3 with the snare drum. It'll sound kind of like this. Then what we do is we take this paradiddle idea that we're doing and we play it for about the same amount of time we did with the normal drum beat. So it'll sound kind of like this. We can rinse and repeat that a few times until it gets comfortable, until it gets easier. Now, this is where the grid part gets really weird and really hard. When we play the grid, the paradiddles are going to shift 1 note over, but the bass drum is going to stay the same. That's the thing that makes it hard, is now everything's shifted off, so it just doesn't quite sound right. So I'm going to play a little bit of it. Really fun. It sounds cool. It's really hard. When I first learned it, it took me quite a bit of time before it kind of got, oh, that makes sense, you know, that sort of situation. Let's shift it over 1 more. This one's one of my favorite. I feel it grooves really nicely. like that one a lot. The next one is a little bit harder, a lot bit harder. In my opinion, it's probably the hardest one of all of them. So here we go. Now, I played 3 notes before the paradiddle started. What those 3 notes are, is they're actually the paradiddle that happens before the measure starts, but there is no first note of the paradiddle. And I like to do that because then you still get a feeling of like this constant stream of all that going, instead of there being a big gap like there was in the third one we just did. So I like to just keep it going so that way it sounds like it flows the whole way through. So that's the grid. And kind of how it all comes together is it looks kind of like this. That's kind of what it sounds like. I like using this. This is the beginning of what I call linear groove, and basically what that means is every note is accounted for. I never kind of stop. And it's just a bunch of rudiments being thrown together, paradiddles, double paradiddles, triple paradiddles, paradiddle diddles, a bunch of just diddles and paras just thrown in and mixed and mashed in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes I play a bunch of notes on the hi-hat, sometimes there's a bunch on the snare drum, but it always keeps flowing. For me, it's really fun to play, but it's really easy to get lost if you aren't paying attention. So I'm going to show you a little bit. Here we go. I kind of like playing that kind of drum beat a lot. But again, it's really awkward, it's really weird. But again, very fun. So those are a bunch of things to get the drum set sounding nice and fun without sacrificing, oh, I need a new sound. Oh, I need a new this. Oh, I need another cymbal. Oh, I need another drum. No, you can do all this with bass drum, snare drum, hi-hat. This idea of minimalism really got, I guess the person who kind of took it home for me, made it so that I was like, yes, this is what I should be doing. It's a famous drummer named Jojo Mayer. He's a very great drummer, does a whole ton of cool stuff. But in one of his DVDs, he's like hanging out in the street, and he just has this thing, and he's playing like crazy, and it sounds really cool. And basically, he said something along the lines of, people are just hiding behind stuff. You don't need a whole lot of stuff. Now, part of why I'm talking about it and being all minimalistic like this right now as well is a lot of these ideas, you don't need a drum set to do it. Got a right hand, you got a left hand, you got a right foot, you got a left foot, and all you need is a chair. I get it. It's not the most fun because drums are very fun to play, very fun to hit and make noise and all that stuff. It's really fun to be loud and all that. I do this a lot when I am traveling or when I'm unable to have a drum set in front of me or wherever I am. It's great to practice, great to work on stuff without having the noise complaints coming at you, or without getting people, you know, without having to spend 20 minutes, set up a thing. Okay, now you can play. Oh, time's up, now you tear it all down. And it just gets your hands and your legs going. It gets your coordination going. And if you sound really good on your hands and legs, then you probably sound really good in real life on a drum set. It's really great. That's part of why I like doing it. Cool. So now going back to kind of the very beginning where I played this drum solo thing. What I did is I ended up starting with like just the snare drum, doing some rudiments there. Maybe do some rolls, that sort of thing. And so what I was trying to do is I was making it so that you heard this as like a bed of sound. And then the things that kind of popped out were either the accents, that sort of thing, or another instrument, like the hi-hat or the bass drum. That sort of thing. Then later on, the hi-hat started going in this constant pattern. And why I did that was because now we have something that as an audience we can grip onto, we can hear it and be like, oh yeah, that's what's happening. That way we can kind of orient ourselves to the music. Much easier to hear where the groove is when the hi-hat's playing. It's just an audio thing. We like that sort of stuff. At least I do, as a human being. So that's a whole lot of stuff we can do on the drum set. Now, one thing we can do as well is change our sounds a little bit. So like, for instance, the snare drum has been on this whole time. Ah, it's a new sound. It's mostly the same, but it's a little bit different. We can press our stick in and play with the other stick. And now we're changing the notes a little. That's an option we have. Another thing we can do is we can take our sticks and we can hit the rims. Or we can do what's called a rim click. That sort of thing. All of a sudden I can play some stuff just on the snare drum. I don't even need the hi-hat right now. Hi-hat, open, closed, play it with the foot, hit the center while it's open, hit the side. Notice how the two different cymbals sound different, all that stuff. It's really fun, really useful. Alrighty, cool. So, I'm just gonna spend a little bit of time grooving and moving. I'm gonna add an instrument here in a second, just so that way you have more going on. And you can kind of hear how all this stuff is getting, I guess, augmented by more sounds, instead of it being like, I have to use the more sounds or else I can't play this stuff. And that's not what we want. I always work on one surface, or maybe two or three, just so that way I have noises to hit. And then I move it to the rest of the drum set. So, I'll play a little bit, here we go. Pretty fun sounding. What if we added, how does a crash cymbal sound? Well, crash cymbals, they're decently loud, decently fun. That's kind of what it sounds. Crash cymbal makes a whole lot of difference. Suddenly it sounds way cooler, but I've only added one thing. I've only played like maybe 5 notes on it entirely, but it just makes it sound cooler. So let's add another thing, shall we? So this guy is known as the ride cymbal. What the ride cymbal is good for is riding on. just play a bunch on it, that kind of thing. And we use it as drummers a lot as something that kind of gives our hi-hat a break. So I'll play a little bit with this guy too. Notice how we're adding some things here. It's starting to sound a little cooler as we go. But we can't get there without having a strong bass. So. Boom. Way more things to hit. Way more things to make new noises with. Let's add a couple other things. We've got ourselves a floor tom. It's called floor tom because it sits on the floor. We're going to add ourselves a top tom, also known as a rack tom, also known as just a tom. There we go. And now again, we have more sounds. Now we can add more crashes, we can add more cymbals, we can add more toms, we can add more of all this stuff. There's one thing that I've found that everybody, absolutely everybody, loves to have. A cowbell. Look at this guy. I very much enjoy playing on a cowbell. I know tons of people who like playing on cowbell. Cowbell is like a very groovy instrument if we use it correctly. So, I'll play a little bit and then I'll add it in. Here we go. So much fun to play. I can play that all day. I can play the cowbell all day. I can play the floor tom all day. All of these. But it's only good if we start with the beginning stuff. Start with the basics. You just need a snare drum, you just need a bass drum, you just need a hi-hat. Or you just need your hands and your feet. Once you're able to play the things, then you can add things like the drum set, like toms, like the cowbell, like the crash cymbal. You can add all that stuff together, and then it starts sounding good. Then it starts sounding different. Then you have more options. A lot of drummers that I see that are younger, they're like, oh, I need to have this to be good. Oh, I need this to be good. And they're thinking of items like a cymbal or a drum. But what I found is all you need is stuff in here. If you're thinking good, and you're thinking creatively, and you're trying to go outside the box, you can do a whole lot of cool stuff. That's why a lot of people like watching drummers. Is like, what are they gonna do? What's gonna happen next? And that's kind of why I enjoy being a drummer myself. Now, for the most part, as a drummer, we just play things to support everybody else, which is true. We like doing that. I definitely do. Nothing's more fun to me than like a ripping sax solo and a super cool bass line and some awesome keys, and all I'm playing is something like that sort of thing. Oh, it's so fun. And I'm just like chugging along, making sure everyone knows where beat 1 is, but it's so fun. It's so good to hear. We don't always get to play the cool, fast, whatever stuff. We don't go to our most complicated whatever thing. Cool. If anyone has any questions, feel free to voice them. I haven't seen any questions up there yet so far. Hopefully I have this set up right so that I can see your questions. In the meantime, I will talk a little bit about how us drummers kind of come about getting drum sets together. For me, what happened is when I was very, very young, I ended up getting a drum set for Christmas. My parents bought one on Craigslist, and I was like, oh man, this is the coolest thing ever. And then as I started growing up and getting better as a player, I started being like, I kind of want to develop my sound. Now the cool thing about drummers is we have a whole lot of flexibility with the drum set as to what we want. I've seen drum sets with like 1 tom, 2 toms, 3 toms, 5 toms, 47 toms. There's a very famous drummer, Terry Bozzio. His drum set is massive, and he uses everything in there. Some of us have 1 snare drum, 2 snare drums, 5 snare drums, 20 cymbals, can never have enough cymbals, all that stuff. So for me, I was like, what do I want for my sound? What kind of sound do I go for? So for me, I went into a shop, I went to a store, and I played around with all their cymbals. They have them all on on the wall, so you can go ding 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 on them. I brought my sticks because I wanted to know how they sounded with my sticks. Started dinging away on all of them, and I found a few that I liked, a few that I didn't like, and then I started being like, okay, well, does this sound work with this cymbal? Because 2 cymbals might not sound very good together. So I started piecing that together, and that's kind of where I found the cymbals that I have now. Is I just slowly figured it out and was like, I want this sound. Whether it's, cheapo something or other, or $1,000 something else, that's the sound I wanted. Same thing with the drums. I went over and played at various jazz jams, various gigs here and there, and a lot of these places that I was playing at, they had their own drum set already set up. So I didn't need to bring a drum set. And what that meant for me is I'm going to explore what their drum set is about. There was a family that I visited frequently, and I got to hang out with them, and one of them, their drum set was basically this drum set that I have now, and I was like, I want this one. That is the thing that I need to have in my life. And so I went and I searched, and ta-da, I found it, got it, and that's kind of how I made my sound happen. It was a slow and long process, but it was very fun. It's not like a lot of other instruments where it's like, I got a new saxophone. It's the whole saxophone. And then sometimes they're like, oh, I've got a mouthpiece though, and I've got a different reed, but that's 3 parts, whereas the drum set is like 15 parts. That's what I enjoy, is building up, figuring out what I want. And I don't use this all the time. Sometimes I play concerts where it's just not appropriate, it doesn't sound right. Sometimes they want things to sound a little brighter or a little lighter. Sometimes they want things where the snare drum's lower and more thumpy, more fat and full, that sort of stuff. So I try to gauge to whatever I'm playing for. But that's kind of what I found to be very useful. So that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about for today. Thanks again for coming and joining me. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. If you just want to listen to music, check out my YouTube channel, Be The Drum. It's on YouTube. It's pretty easy to find. Yeah, many thanks to the Brewery Arts Center for putting this on again and letting me play some more and show you guys a little bit more about drums. Cool. Thank you very much.